Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5. And today I'm talking to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, after last night's meeting at the Wellington Council, the old Wellington Council chambers. G'day, Matthew.
Yeah, g'day. Actually, it's quite nice going to the Wellington Council chambers. It's still a dedicated chamber, unlike in Dubbo where we have a flexible chamber. And so it's nice to sit in there in that room and think about the history that's involved with the old Wellington Shire Council.
Yes, well, I understand there was a bit of heated debate last night about some things in relation to Wellington in particular, with one particular council, but we won't go there today. Let's go to the Saxa Road situation and what's happening with developments there.
Certainly, and when we talk about Saxa Road, the focus for the meeting last night was all around the Coomabella crossing at Mitchell Creek and the decision to be made there. A few options, I suppose, you could talk about there in terms of what we could do. The culvert that's there at the moment, and people that are familiar with that area know how damaged that culvert is. It's obviously completely blown apart and very difficult to get across now with some of the bollards we've got there. And then there's the temporary crossing on the side, which council didn't construct. Council didn't give anyone authority to construct. Some of the local farmers put that there out of necessity. Fisheries wanted to close that down because it was construction work in a waterway that they didn't authorise. Council went and appealed to Fisheries and said there's got to be some way for these other vehicles to get across. In the end, Fisheries agreed to give basically a stay of execution on that particular area. But our process now is to get some sort of permanent solution there. If we just went and replaced the culvert with another culvert, so basically repaired what was there, the estimation of cost of that is a bit under $500,000, maybe $470,000. And we'd be pretty confident that we'd get that money back from the state government with the disaster recovery funding process that's available for that. And there were some councils who were keen to go that path. That would cost council nothing. Let's get it back to how it was, knowing full well that it's going to go underwater on a semi-regular basis. It's going to be impassable on a semi-regular basis. And probably, Tony, you'd find that it would get blown apart again by the same, or for the same reason that the current one's been blown apart, and maybe in 10 years' time you'd be spending another $500,000. We think there's a better solution than that. We think it's fairer for the people that live in that area and people that use that particular area, and that might be locals, it could be people travelling through the area, could be tourists, for example, to put a better solution in place. So what council resolved last night was to go out to tender, and we're talking about probably a $2.7 million bridge in that area, which again is more expensive than $470,000, but we think it's the right solution there. And that bridge will be above the 1 in 100 year flood level, so it'll be much higher than the current culvert that's there in place. And that will be a better long-term solution. Vehicles will be able to go across it when there's rain, when there's water there, they'll be able to use it. And we think that would be a 100-year solution or thereabouts, which again would be better than spending $500,000 every 10 years or so. The problem is obviously that that's going to be coming out of council's bucket rather than coming out of the government's bucket. But there is a process called betterment, and we'll be going through a betterment process to try and get as much of that money as possible from that process. And we believe we'll be able to get most of that money through the betterment process, where we're going to appeal to the state government and say, why spend $500,000 every 10 years? We think it's better to spend this amount of money and do it once and do it right.
Yes, okay, well that's good. I might add, we have discussed before the possibility of looking at light traffic, and apparently it has been discussed in council, looking at the possibility of allowing light traffic to pass through along the Saxa Road. So what do you expect will happen there? So
it's a good question, Tony, because if I go back one step, the downside to spending $3 million or thereabouts on a proper bridge and have that done properly is the timeline associated with that. From today going forward with the council resolution from last night, it's probably a 16-month process to get that project finished. So that's not great for people that live there for the next 16 months. It'll be great after 16 months, but in the next 16 months, not great. There is a council resolution at the moment that says to close off Saxa Road, mainly with the condition of that Coomabella crossing and also the road itself. So in discussions that I've had with our staff, they've certainly been able to look at that and see whether or not maybe it could be opened up again to light traffic, keeping in mind that it is still a dangerous crossing there with the bollards in place and with that side crossing there, and fisheries would want to have a say on it as well. But our staff have made the point that it's a council resolution, so for that to change, it would need to come back to council for a further council resolution to open that up again to light traffic. It would need a report from our staff to do that, so whether or not we do that or not, I don't know a definite answer on that. There's a fair few steps to go through to open that up again if that was in fact going to be a process that was undertaken by council. So for the moment, what's in place, local traffic only. It's probably safe to say, Tony, that some people that are not local traffic users are using that road, and again, that's against the conditions of that road at the moment.
Well, Matthew, getting on to the next subject of bridges, the low-level bridge in Wellington, I'm having lots of inquiries from some of the locals about what's happening there. I believe there is some movement in relation to the report done by the Snowy Engineering Authority, whatever they call themselves, about that. And one of the complaints I do get in relation to the bridge is, apart from the amenity of the area, is the effect on the local traffic. So what's happening there?
So this is one that's been ongoing, obviously, towards the end of last year. There was the complete cave-in or shearing off of some of the riverbank that led down to the Duke of Wellington Bridge. So that bridge has been out of action since then. We've obviously had some engineering work done on that. So the company referred to is called SMEC, S-M-E-C, and they've done an analysis, first of all, on the bridge. That was the important part. Is the bridge in a good enough physical condition that it could be used again? And you'd hope that was the case because it was built to be in a river, and it's in a river, and the water flowing down there has been flowing down the Macquarie where it sits. So we would have been disappointed if that wasn't the case, but we needed to make sure that was the case to start with. So they've come back with their report. We've only just had a workshop in the last 2 weeks about this. It'll go through a more comprehensive report to the next council meeting. But the first part of that said that yes, the bridge structurally is sound, bit of superficial damage with the railings, with some trees that have fallen on railings, but obviously nothing you can't repair without too much trouble there. But again, the bridge physically is intact and could handle vehicles on there again. Tick, step one. Step two is you need to get access to that bridge. And as you know, at the end of Gabolian Street there, where the riverbank's been chewed away there, that's the issue there. That goes back, as we've talked about before, Tony, back to 2018 when there was a report done and given to council that talked about the fact that that river bank would keep eroding away. And at the 2018 report, it said maybe in the next 10 to 20 years, there'll need to be some action taken there because that is going to keep chewing away there. It happened a bit quicker than the last council expected. They obviously did nothing about it, a bit quicker than they expected, and it's obviously fallen away there now. So now the option is, and we've got a few different options there, we could do nothing. We could just leave the bridge as it is, and we could leave that riverbank as it sits there now. And over time, that would keep chewing away as the Bell River comes down and meets the Macquarie. That would still keep chewing away and obviously create a larger and larger gap there. So that doesn't sound like a great option. So then there's a few other options about some stabilisation works, and all the other options we looked at would need some sort of stabilisation works there to basically fill back in the riverbank that's collapsed and then put something in there that would stop it being eroded. The scary part there, Tony, is the dollars we're talking about. We're talking about in the vicinity of $21.4 million for the stabilisation works. And then on top of that, what we might need to do in terms of fixing up the road and doing those, they're minor costs in the scheme of things. They might be a couple $100,000 for those parts of it, but the stabilisation works are the main thing. You'd have to put in a coffer dam, you'd have to redirect the water flow around there, and then you'd have to basically rebuild that area out. Of course, as we know, prevention is better than cure. Having done this back in 2019 when we had a drought would have made a lot more sense. But those are the expensive costs now. There'd be some sort of gabion wall put in, potentially to have some sort of physical structure there in addition to the riverbank. We don't have $21.4 million sitting around in loose change to go and do that right at the moment. There'll be a recommendation to the council meeting next month. my guess would be that probably what we'll do is we'll go and seek disaster recovery funding from the state government. There's no guarantee that we'll get that money from the state government, but again, we'll go through and try and get that money. If we do get that money, we'll need some more approvals. Fisheries will have to approve it because it's in a waterway. The works approval from DPE, we might even need to get some approvals from Water New South Wales, but essentially there'll be a lot of work to do there. First and foremost, we'll need to get some of that money, and again, that'll be the approach that I think we'll take, but it will be a council resolution next month, but I think we'll take disaster recovery funding, and again, that'll be a betterment process there as well.
Okay. And there's good news in relation to what's happening at the Binjang Airport or Binjang Aerodrome with the upgrades to the runway. So what's happening there?
Well, this is a process, as you're well aware of, that we've had in terms of getting some funding out of the federal government. So we got that funding, which is fantastic, $350,000. We had to meet that with our funding as well, so we had to match that dollar for dollar. So we've essentially got $700,000 there. Now, the first thing is to do some of the work out on the apron and basically doing some of the resealing out there. So basically it's an apron, runway and apron reseal. So we've got tenders for that, and the tenders were decided last night. It was in the confidential part of the council meeting, and that's where we considered the tenders, but I'm allowed to talk about the winning tender. So Bitcher Pave Limited has won that tender, and that was for $596,619.10, and that's for the runway and apron reseal. There's a little bit of extra money on top of that for the $700,000 to go through and manage the project and do some associated works around there. But that's exciting news that we've got that happening. Some councillors debated last night, and again, the council resolution is what wins today, but there were some councillors who were keen to see us not spend that money on the airport. They were saying that they thought that was not a good spend of $350,000 of council money, but we'd already committed to that. We'd committed to that in that funding application that we put in, so it was a fairly easy decision of council to go ahead with that tender and go ahead and spend that money and basically upgrade that. And I hope we'll be able to work out more uses we'll be able to get, more usage and different usage we'll be able to get out of that airport once we do that, or basically spend that money on that reseal. I think we'll get a better outcome for the airport, a better outcome for the Wellington community, and the potential there, Tony, with all the money that's being spent on the renewable energy zone around that area, to see what other ways we can utilise that particular part of council's facilities.
Okay. Matthew, I must say I find it very strange when a council can go and get funds from either a state or federal government, and those funds get granted, that a council would want to argue the point about whether they should spend it or not. I mean, that's just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, again, it's all part of the debate, Tony, and any council can bring up their point of view, and obviously that's what we have in a democracy, but I think it was a fairly small voice that was talking about not going ahead with that. I think the majority of councils were very keen to go ahead and see it improved and see it upgraded. We've talked about it for some time. We've got the money there, so it seemed like an obvious decision, and that's the resolution of council now, to go ahead, and that's what we'll do.
Well, that's good. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not really council's money, and a lot of people probably don't realise that more than 70% of funds that run local councils, or in particular our council, comes from sources other than ratepayers. It usually comes from the state government, and you also get funds from the federal government. I mean, this is how local government works, for God's sake.
Yeah, that's right. You get grants and various programs from the federal government, from the state government. We do have charges as well. There are charges to use various facilities of council, so that adds to it. And it's ratepayers' money as well. The main objective, I think, from certainly when I'm making decisions personally, and I can't speak for other councillors, but I think in general councillors make decisions saying this is public money. We've got to use this public money for the public good and for all the public. We've got an amalgamated council now. I'm very conscious that we've got 7,536 square kilometres now. We've got to be doing the best thing we can for that amalgamated council. It's not, to me, no longer is it the old Dubbo City Council, the old Wellington Shire Council. You can't be thinking like that. You've got to be thinking of the greater good for the entire local government area, and that's the way councils should be thinking.
Well, that's their responsibility to think that way, actually, whether they like it or not.
Yep.
So it's pretty much mandated by state government that that's what they have to do. That's their job. So Matthew, what else is happening around the traps that you want to talk about?
Well, I think Australia Day was an important one to talk about as well. This year, we tried something a little bit different for the 2023 Australia Day ceremony. We weren't allowed to change the Australia Day event for Dubbo, and that was on a technicality in the Australian Citizenship Ceremonies Code. Because we had more than 20 conferees throughout the year, we had no option, and don't worry, I argued with the Department of Home Affairs for several months about this, but we had no option but to have the event on the 26th of January. Because Wellington had less than 20 conferees throughout the year, we did have the option to change that, and we did go ahead with that, and I actually think it was quite successful. We held it at 5:30pm on the 25th of January, a twilight event. We actually added a speaker to both of the programs, both in Dubbo and Wellington, where we had someone giving an Aboriginal context, 65,000 years of history. Let's bring that into it. So we had three main speakers, an Aboriginal speaker, the ambassador and the mayor or the deputy mayor in Wellington's case. So that seemed to be quite successful. This time around for the 2024 event, we do have some more flexibility. Andrew Giles, the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs, made a decision after we'd made our decision about the date for 2023 and said that councils across the nation could now hold their Australia Day ceremony and citizenship ceremony 3 days before Australia Day or on Australia Day or 3 days after. So basically you gave a window of a week, which I think was a good move. So that gave us more flexibility as to when we would hold the event, both in Dubbo and Wellington this time around. Fair bit of debate, some different decisions made at the committee meetings with recommendations through to council, back and forth here and there. In the end, the final decision that was made was to have the Wellington ceremony the night before again, but this time move it back a bit later, 6:30pm rather than 5:30pm. And that was a bit of feedback from the community this year. A bit hot still and also a bit harder to get to the ceremony after work. So we've moved that back to 6:30 and we've left the Australia Day ceremony for Dubbo on the day itself. And again, we'll look at that after the ceremonies in 2024 to see what we might do for the following year. So I think still a positive move, and I think still that bit of flexibility around when the day has been held is a good move across the nation.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Matthew.
My pleasure, Tony. Always good to be chatting about council items.
Yeah, and it's always fantastic to be able to talk about these things so that the public knows what's going on. And you've been listening to the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickerson, on Binjang 91.5.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.